just joined us, if you haven't already, please take a moment, put your name and where you're from in the chat. Just gives us a sense of who's in the room, and it lets everyone else know as well. Also, you'll notice back up in the chat, there was a link to the session agenda for today, if you want to look at that. And then please keep an eye on that chat. We'll be putting some links in the chat for you for a couple different documents that we'll be referring to throughout the day. I also, welcome to everybody. We will get started in probably about 1 minute. All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's really exciting to see people from all over the country joining us. So from those of you from Alaska to Indiana, I saw Ohio, welcome. We're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the challenges of teacher retention and share some experiences with a specific school district in Alaska. And so we have a pretty simple agenda today. We're going to start off with a quick overview of some of the research on teacher working conditions. We look at teacher working conditions as something that we can possibly manipulate in order to improve teacher retention. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some localized strategies, a process that you can use to really look at and examine your local context to try to address working conditions in your district. And then we'll wrap everything up. Before we get started, though, we want to just talk a little bit about who we are and why we're talking to you right now. So first of all, we are REL Northwest. And REL Northwest is part of the Institute of Education Sciences. And if you're not familiar with the Institute of Education Sciences, it's an organization contained within the U.S. Department of Education that really focuses on supporting research in education, and then providing technical assistance to education providers throughout the United States. Really, its fundamental goal is to improve the use of research and evaluation within education systems. And within the Institute of Education Sciences, there is the REL program, or Regional Education Laboratory Program. This has been around the REL program has been around for quite some time, and there are 10 RELs all the way across the country, each that serve a different group of states. As REL Northwest, we serve the states of Idaho, Montana, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. And our job is to work with the states, the districts, and schools within all of those states to really help generate and apply evidence with a goal of improving student outcomes throughout the state. So improving education systems or whatever. So I'd like to go ahead and start by introducing the team today. So first of all, we're going to hear from Jane Downey from Montana State University. She is in the teacher preparation department. She'll tell a little bit more about herself when she comes up, but she's in the teacher preparation department, but also does a lot of work with teacher retention in rural districts. We also have Kimberly Hankins, who is the superintendent of Lower Kuskokwim School District in Bethel, Alaska, and surrounding villages. Trudy Chirasara from REL Northwest. And myself, I'm David Janoski. I am a researcher at REL Northwest. And you'll hear from all of us at one point in time or the other today. And so what I'd like to do now is bring Trudy in, and Trudy's going to highlight some of the research on teacher working conditions.
Thanks, David. So as David mentioned, we're all here today because districts and schools across the U.S. are struggling to retain teachers. And though some teacher attrition is natural through moving away from the district or retirement or other life changes, there are some factors that we talked about within a district's control, such as teacher working conditions, that could influence a teacher's decision to stay or leave. So we, REL Northwest, partnered with the Lower Kuskokwim School District to help identify evidence-based strategies and tools to continuously monitor and improve working conditions, all with the goal of increasing teacher retention. So today we're going to share some of the resources from that project, including some of these research findings from a review of the research, and then also a process that you all may be able to use to really look at research and local data, identify steps and strategies that are relevant to your specific context related to working conditions. So REL Northwest gathered existing research that examined the relationship between teacher working conditions and teacher retention. From these studies that we reviewed, we identified 8 categories of working conditions that may influence a teacher's decision to stay or leave. So teachers may be more likely to stay in their school if their school has positive family and community engagement, supportive school leadership, consistent and equitable management of student conduct, opportunities for teachers to engage in leadership opportunities, facilities and resources that are conducive to supporting teaching and learning, collective support for implementing instructional initiatives, and time for teaching and planning, as well as relevant professional development opportunities. There's a link in chat that you'll get that provides access to a fact sheet. This fact sheet has a lot more information about each of these categories of working conditions and provides some examples of what those look like and strategies related to each of those working conditions. So if you have a chance offline to dig deeper into that, that would be providing you some more detailed information about those categories. So the studies that we reviewed were often conducted more in suburban or urban settings. So these categories are a good starting point for rural districts as well. However, if you're in a rural district, you might need to consider how addressing these working conditions might play out differently in your rural setting. And to help us understand some of the emerging research on working conditions in rural settings, we're going to spend some time talking with Dr. Jane Downey. I'll hand it over to David.
Hi, Jane. Hey, would you start off by just giving us just a quick introduction? Who are you? What is your work like?
Sure. Thank you, David. I'm a professor at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, and I direct our Center for Research on Rural Education. And I'm really passionate about the work that we're doing here because, number one, I'm a rural kid. I'm a product of rural schools. I was one of those kids who rode the school bus for 12 years, an hour every morning and night, and went to one school building, grades 1 through 12. And I know the difference that well-prepared teachers can make in kids' lives. And I'm really committed to working on that important issue here in Montana, and also connecting with people who are doing that good work all across the US. So it's been a really fun journey, and we're learning a lot these days.
Well, so let's just start off with, why is it important to focus on teacher working conditions when we're talking about rural schools?
Well, I think it's really good for us to think about that, because like Trudy said, there is a around the world there is a huge number of unfilled teaching positions. Schools struggling to retain teachers in all these different contexts. And it's really critical that we understand what's going on so that we can tailor our response and to address it effectively. And Trudy is right on when she says that when it comes to the research, the rural context has been overlooked in a lot of the data so far. And so some of the knowledge that we have is, while it's really good and valuable, it may not be entirely relevant or applicable to the rural context. So that's why we engage really carefully in focusing on rural schools.
So let's narrow in on rural schools a little bit. We gave a list of factors, working condition factors. What seem to be, of those factors or other ones that you've identified, what seems to be the most important factors or in most important working conditions that affect retention in rural schools?
Well, two things are coming up in our research and in our conversations across our networks. One is retention is really supported by connections to the local community, connections to the profession. And secondly, support for instruction, support for different kinds of things. But here's the thing that we're diving into right now, David, I'm kind of excited about this, is that these two factors look different depending on career stage. For early early career teachers, mid-career teachers, and late career teachers, connection and support matters, but it is defined differently in those three areas. It's a kind of like the concept of fun. I think, what is fun, for some people is not fun for other people, and support and connections are very similar in that way. So, for example, we have launched a program here in Montana called Mentor Montana to provide mentoring for early career rural teachers. And that mentoring program is matched by content and grade area, and veteran Montana teachers are trained to serve as mentors, and they may be reaching all the way across the state virtually, but we make sure that they're connected and that they can really address key content and grade level issues. Now, we're seeing some very positive results from that work, and we're excited about the potential for that as we build that out. And what's really neat is that the connections and support that the new teachers need, those needs are being addressed. But we're also seeing that that's starting to address some of the needs for mid-career and late career teachers when it comes to connecting in the network of mentors and finding support. One mentor wrote to us and said, "I am so enjoying being part of this mentoring community, not only so that I can help a new teacher, but also that I can be inspired and mentored myself through this network." So we have a serious need to pay attention to mid-career teachers' needs, and particularly their goals, their interests, and what they're looking for that qualifies as support and what qualifies as connection for them. And I think as we dig into this research more, we will be able to better tailor our responses to doing the kinds of things and structures that will help to continue to retain those teachers in the future.
So to sort of wrap up this conversation about research, I mean, it sounds like, one, it's really important that not only do we pay attention to the needs of our incoming teachers, our new teachers, our 1 to 3 year teachers, who a very important group that we need to capture and hold on to. But we also need to really think about our mid-career teachers and the needs of those teachers so that we can hold on to them. So I guess my last question for you is this: based on the research that you've done, based on the research that other people have done around the country, if I'm a school leader looking to start thinking about, okay, I need to improve retention in my building, where do you think I should start? What would the research tell me is the best place for me to start?
Well, what we're seeing in our preliminary findings so far is that this starts with conversation. We have some really highly skilled teachers in our buildings, in our communities, who we need to listen to. We need to be asking good questions. We need to adopt that spirit of inquiry and be curious about what they are looking for and want, and what their needs are. These are people who we need to be heard. And I think that's a really good starting point for any of us in the work that we're doing. We have a pre-retirement teacher turnover tide that we need to interrupt right now. And I think that's a really important first step.
Well, great. I really appreciate hearing you sharing not only your work, but a little bit of perspective on the work around the country. And I know that everyone else was excited to hear that. So, it's great to hear that. One, I mean, we just need to start having conversations and listening to our teachers so that we learn a little bit more about what they need in order to try to, improve working conditions for them. So thanks, Jane. Really appreciate your time today. So I want to transition now a little bit. We've heard the larger research view. We've heard a little bit about what the research says. I want to transition now to a little bit about how REL Northwest has been helping Lower Kuskokwim School District to take that research and turn it into a set of strategies and ideas for addressing teacher retention. And so, keep in mind, all of these various categories and elements that make up working conditions really pose a challenge for educational leaders. There's a lot for us to think about here, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different working conditions that make this an almost overwhelming problem to address. And so REL Northwest tried to take this and turn it into a relatively simple, straightforward process. And we worked with Lower Kuskokwim School District to implement this process, and we're doing ongoing work to try to identify those factors that we can address. So I want to bring Trudy back in to describe that process a little bit, and then we will begin hearing from Kimberly Hankins, the superintendent of Lower Kuskokwim School District. So Trudy.
Thanks, David. So y'all just saw a handout that was put into the chat, and what we're going to do today is give a really high-level overview of each of these steps, but you can look at the handout, maybe take a minute now to open that up and dive into it. It provides a lot more detail, some templates, some examples of each of the steps. So I'll give a high-level overview of each of the steps, and then we'll hear a little bit from Kimberly about lessons learned from implementing those steps in Lower Kuskokwim School District. So the first step of the process is to narrow the focus. So as we said, this can be a lot of information and overwhelming. And we know that for any initiative to really be effective, it's really important to consider how to narrow down, because we can't address everything all at once, and we can't just do too much at once. Otherwise, we won't really be effective at doing anything. So instead, you really need to find the focus that matters the most in your district. To do this, you might want to look at existing data like exit interviews and climate surveys, as Jane said, to hear those teacher voices and understand what's important to them to begin to address in your district. And then also think about what initiatives you already have underway that might align with the research on the working conditions, so that you're connecting this current work to existing initiatives rather than adding on one more thing to do.
So let's bring in Kimberly. We introduce everybody to Kimberly Hankins, the superintendent of Lower Kuskokwim School District. And Kimberly, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I'm Kimberly Hankins, superintendent of LKSD, or the Lower Kuskokwim School District. Lower Kuskokwim School District is located in Western Alaska. We are the largest regional educational attendance area in the state. We serve approximately 4,000 students in 29 schools in 24 communities over a land area of 22,000 square miles. So we're rural and remote. We employ about 1,100 people, approximately 350 of which are certified teachers.
So, Kimberly, we spent some time going over the research with you, those 8 factors that we talked about earlier today, and after reviewing the research, LKSD landed on school leadership, engaging with families and communities, and the teacher use of time as sort of 3 working conditions that you wanted to spend some time focusing on. Why these? What was it about these that spoke to you as a representative of LKSD?
Yeah, well, what Trudy said is spot on. Those 8 conditions, we knew we can't do all of them at once. So it was important for us to look at our own data in making decisions. So we did look at our school level data, district data, school climate connectedness surveys, exit surveys from certified teachers who are leaving the district, and then really work to interpret that in our local context. What does that mean for us? And that helped us really narrow our focus. We selected those 3 particular areas because we had already identified some issues in each of those areas that we knew we wanted to improve on. So those made the most sense to us.
Okay. So, in terms of this first step here, and we'll have a couple other conversations about the upcoming steps. But in terms of this first step, what advice would you give other districts when reviewing the research base?
To really focus on what your needs are as a district. You can look at the research, but I think it's really critical to apply it locally. So our lens was always, what does this mean and look like for LKSD?
Great. All right. So I'm going to bring Trudy back in here, and she's going to talk a little bit about steps 2 and 3.
All right. So for step 2, this is going to be once you've identified which category of working conditions you'll focus on, and you'll determine solutions to improve that working condition. To do this, we suggest conducting a root cause analysis. This really allows you to kind of pinpoint contributing factors to the working condition, and then also get to that true underlying cause that may be creating the working conditions that you're trying to address. In the handout, you'll find a fishbone diagram template and also examples of a completed diagram to help you with this process. So step 3 is the next step, and this is really to develop those strategies for addressing the root causes that you identified. This step involves developing a theory of action. And we like to think of the theory of action of really describing a progression of strategies. So you're wanting to think about what should you do first? So which strategies may be foundational for other strategies to really be successful? In the theory of action, you'll also focus on determining indicators of success related to each of the strategies and thinking about what's your final outcome related to those strategies that you're trying to implement. This will help you in the end to understand how you got the results related to your final outcome, rather than just knowing whether or not you met your final outcome. Again, within the handout, there are templates to complete a theory of action and an example theory of action.
Great. So let's chat again with Kimberly and get a sense of what these 2 steps look like for LKSD. So Kimberly, as we went through, again, we were talking about the school leadership and teacher use of time and family and community engagement. And as we were going through all of that, we decided, or you decided actually, that one problem statement was sort of this negative teacher perception of school leadership. And that within that, that you really felt that housing was something that led to that negative perception. So tell me a little bit more about that. What do you think caused that negative perception?
Sure. So yeah, it was really important for us to narrow our focus during this stage because we can't do it all. And I think that's important to state. So within that topic of school leadership, we were looking at a couple different things. One was feedback to teachers, support for behavior management. And then you're right, we did narrow our focus to housing, specifically because of a couple of factors. One, as people have mentioned, teacher recruitment. It's always been so challenging for us in rural, remote Alaska. But over the last 5 years, it's just become even more so, like almost impossible. We started school yesterday. We still have 20 certified teacher openings. So we knew we wanted to look at an area where we could work to impact change and improve conditions that would help retain folks that we had hired.
So, we're using housing as one example. I just want to let everyone know there were other strategies within this idea of teacher leadership, or excuse me, looking at school leadership that we also examined. But, housing, I think, is the one that we had some of the richest conversations about.
Yeah.
And so, the idea here was that if teachers have a negative perception of their housing, that the school leader, as the person that they see on a regular basis and is responsible for responding to challenges with the housing, if the perception of the housing is negative, then the perception of the school leader then becomes negative, right? That's really what we're looking at. So how did you choose to try to attack this problem? What strategies did you think might work to be successful?
Yeah, so we landed on a couple of strategies. And just for a point of clarification, in LKSD, in all of our village-based communities, housing is provided by the district. But we have a huge school district, and in rural, remote Alaska, costs are sky high. So maintaining housing to what we would like to have as an adequate standard can be super challenging. So we narrowed our focus, one, focusing on making sure that our incoming teachers had a realistic expectation for what their housing would be like, so that when they showed up, the reality matched what they were expecting. And we also landed on the fact that there's so much more we could do. We can't necessarily, replace all of our housing, so expensive, but there are things we can do as a district, and then teachers can do themselves to improve the quality of the housing that we do have.
So, we've been talking about this idea of root cause analysis and trying to really dig into, why did this happen? Why do we have this negative perception? And one of the causes we identified was this idea that if we have negative perceptions of housing, or housing perceptions don't match the reality, then we're probably setting ourselves up for some failure later on. And then we identified some strategies. We went through that process of using the theory of action to try to figure out what were our hypotheses and how do we want to try to address this issue. I'm sure at times it felt a little bit clunky because it was just so structured. But what's the advantage of using a really structured process for thinking through some of these challenges?
I think for us, the advantage of that is that it encouraged us to really narrow our focus. So we landed on what are actionable items that are within our control that we think will lead to seeing improvements in teacher retention specific to housing.
So one last question for you. It sounds to me like if you were to give advice to a local district, it would be to really focus your efforts. But we had a lot of other things that were hanging out there that we in our initial conversation we decided to work on. What's going to happen with those?
It doesn't mean they're not still there. We're still working on them, but you can't attack everything at once because otherwise then nothing is the priority. So this is what we landed on as one of the priorities and are working actively on it. And I'm excited about the work.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Bring Trudy back in and we'll look at steps 4 and 5.
Thanks, David. So steps 4 and 5 are going to be once you have your strategies and your indicators and your outcomes identified, then it's really about making plans for everything. So making plans for how are you going to implement these strategies, how are you going to collect data around the indicators, and what data do you want to look at for your outcomes to gauge how well the strategies are working along the way and make changes. So for step 4, to plan for implementation, for each strategy, you'll want to think about documenting the steps to implementation. So thinking about who's going to be most responsible for carrying out those steps, what resources are they going to need, what's the timeline going to look like for implementation. So just really documenting as much as possible so that you can go back to it and carry out your plan without having kind of gaps in how that's going to look. Then for each indicator, you also want to determine what data you need to understand whether or not the indicators are being met. So we recommend thinking about doing this kind of ongoing and identifying maybe a few survey questions that you might ask related to each indicator. And then thinking about the audience for who's going to complete those surveys as well. And then to ensure that you stay on top of tracking that data collection, you'll want to make sure you have a plan for data collection related to all of those indicators that you're focusing on. So you would create a kind of an annual data collection plan that could be organized by month to help you kind of think about what am I going to be doing each month to collect data around the indicators and outcomes. In the handout, you'll find an example again and templates to use that include an implementation plan, a table for identifying indicator data needs, and then an annual data collection plan as well. And then the final step in the process is really, to kind of start doing through implementing, and then you really need to think about collecting and reviewing ongoing data from your plan to understand how those strategies are working. So as you're reviewing the data, you can determine if you need to make some adjustments to how you're implementing the strategies, if you need to think about additional strategies that you need to try out, or if you just need to make some overall adjustments to your focus. And this can really help you to support your teacher retention goals.
Great, thanks, Trudy. Before I bring Kimberly back in, I want to invite our audience. I'm sure at this point in time, there's some questions that are bubbling up for you. Please go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll have an opportunity after we visit with Kimberly again to look at those questions. And these can be questions for us. These can be questions for Jane or Kimberly. But just anything that you'd like to know a little bit more about, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will address those as we finish up here today. So I'd like to bring Kimberly back in. So Kimberly, we haven't had a chance to collect data yet. I mean, we worked throughout the last school year, and we got to the point of designing some plans, and those will be implemented. Some of that was implemented over the summer, but a lot of that will be implemented over the year. But what will data collection look like? How are you guys going to collect data on what you're doing?
Yeah, so specific to teacher housing conditions, we decided to survey staff quarterly for a couple of different reasons, rather than at the end of the school year. One, that gives us actionable data throughout the school year and increases our opportunities to respond to that data as we receive it. And then in our response and making those improvements and being responsive, we can show as a district that we are seeking to improve conditions for our teachers specific to housing. So we hope through that, then that'll increase the positive perception of the district.
So, I mean, you mentioned housing specifically, and then there's other things that we're working on. But so within these quarterly surveys, can you tell me just a little bit more about what they might look like? I mean, we're talking, we're all used to getting surveys that are like 15, 20 questions long and take us 20 minutes to complete, and none of us ever finish them. So, what do these surveys look like? Right.
They'll be very short and direct and to the point. We want people to be encouraged to respond to them. And that's one of the goals in providing it quarterly, is that we're not waiting to the end of the school year to get feedback that we really could have taken action on during the school year, or waiting to the end when people are really dissatisfied with something and choose to leave as a result of it, when we could have surveyed early and been responsive and had a chance to improve their conditions and work to retain them as a result of that.
So how are you thinking about, providing that feedback to the staff? I mean, you get a lot of information from them. What are you thinking about? How are you thinking about sharing back with your?
Yeah, so our housing committee will share back results of surveys. We haven't quite defined what that will look like totally, but it's really important that we share the results so that people know they're being heard and we're valuing their input, and that'll increase participation in surveys in the future. And then also that the housing committee shares what they're doing as a result of that, the actual work that's being done. So we hear A, B, and C, we're going to do this with that data, and then show those results so that people know that we value their input and we actively are working to make those improvements for them.
Great. Great. And so I just want to, we're continuing to work with you. For everyone else, the idea of use of time and family and community engagement, we didn't abandon those. In fact, we're going to continue having conversations throughout this upcoming school year where we're going to shift our focus onto those and start thinking about, ways that we can hopefully address those particular working conditions and using the exact same process and go through that. Just any last thoughts from you, Kimberly, before we move on about working conditions in general, the process that we went through with you, just anything you want to share with.
Sure. Yeah, I think for us, it's been a hugely valuable process to go through. For a couple of reasons. One, again, when you just look at those 8 working conditions, it can seem really overwhelming. Like, how do I impact positive change in all of these? That's a huge task. So this process helped us narrow our focus. And then within that, those 3 categories really hone in on those things that are within our control, that are actionable, and we have the resources to achieve in order to improve conditions here in LKSD.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Kimberly. Thank you for your work in supporting the students of Western Alaska. And I really appreciate the time that you spent with us here today. So I would like to open it up to any questions. If you have questions for any of our presenters, you're welcome to put those into the chat. But before we do that, I'd like to bring Jane back in and just, Jane, do you have any response to what you heard and, from the research perspective or from your experience?
Oh, thanks, David. I love the root cause analysis work. It reminds me of my nephew when he was about 6 years old, who asked why, and you'd answer him, and then he'd say, but why? And he would string that out at least, a half a dozen times, because he wanted to understand. And I see that's such a vivid picture in my mind, because it really strikes me, Kimberly, that's what you were doing with your teachers and your people, to not be satisfied with just that sort of first layer initial answer, but that willingness to go deep and to say, well, why is that? and what's contributing, to this next piece. And I think it's that kind of effort. It takes time, but it really pays off. And we've seen that in some of our own work. And so I just could really connect with the value around doing that as a team, as a group, and people being involved together and being heard in that process, I think has a lot of value too. And then if I might, I just would also comment on Kimberly, your district's attention to perception of the positive perception of the district. We're seeing that a lot. And a lot of the work we do is in preparation of new teachers. And I ask them, what will attract you? What are you looking for when you are looking for a rural district? And they're very clear on what they're looking for, what they want, and how a district communicates back to these new teachers is really an important piece of that, making that connection and getting that successful hire. And our new teachers are really looking for places that will support them in the classroom in terms of having a chance to try some innovative things, but that culture of like Kimberly described, of people giving their feedback and being heard. I think those are the kinds of things that can really make a difference, that districts can communicate to new teachers in when they attract and retain them.
Well, thanks, Jane. Really appreciate your perspective on that. Are there any questions from the group? Anything that any of our presenters, something you wanted to hear and didn't hear, or something you'd like a little bit more clarification on? So I'll give you just a minute to put any of those questions in the chat. Well, so far it looks like our presenters did a great job of answering all the questions that people may have. So just a couple things, a couple last things before we wrap up. First of all, I encourage you to, if you haven't already done so, to locate the two handouts for this session. The first handout was the fact sheet that highlights the research related to the working conditions that seem to have an effect on teacher retention. And that was linked in the handout and then we had a handout that sort of described this process and included some of the worksheets that we use with LKSD. So we encourage you to download those and also please don't hesitate to reach out if there are any questions. You received a number of emails about this particular work or about this particular webinar. And any one of those email addresses will get back to us eventually if there's any questions that come up or anything else. So the last thing I'd like to do before we wrap up today is we highly value your input. Did we meet our goals? Did we give you the information that you hope to hear? There is a survey link that is currently in the meeting chat. And please take a few minutes. It should only take a few. There's, I think, only 5 or 6 questions on it. But please take a few minutes and give us a little bit of feedback so that with future webinars, we can better meet your needs. So before you sign off today, please click on that link and complete this session survey. We will hang around for just a few more minutes in case there are any other questions that come up. But as you complete that survey, you're welcome to log off. I hope the new school year is treating everyone well and that everything's going great for you. So thanks very much for your time today. And if there's anything we can do for you, please reach out. Take that survey and we will hang out for a few more minutes. Thanks, everybody.